The boy was standing in the middle of the school lobby, with a red backpack half hanging off one shoulder, looking up at the ceiling like he was trying to count the tiles. That was the image Julian carried with him for weeks afterward. Not the moment Amara turned around and her face went still the way ice forms over a river, quiet and sudden. Not the sharp exchange of words that followed. Just that little boy looking up at the ceiling, perfectly unbothered by everything happening around him. Julian had come to Westbrook Elementary to meet with the principal about a renovation proposal. His company had been preparing for 3 months. He was early. He was checking his phone in the lobby when he heard a child laugh, a short, startled kind of laugh, like something had surprised him, and looked up. The boy was maybe 4, maybe 5. Dark eyes that caught the light a certain way. A jaw still soft with baby fat, but shaped like something Julian saw every morning in his own mirror. He stood there without moving, until Amara came through the side door, holding a lunch tote, and stopped 3 feet away from him. "Julian," she said, "that was all." He looked from her to the boy and back again. "Who is he?" His voice came out lower than he intended. Amara shifted the lunch tote to her other hand. "He's my son." "How old is he?" She didn't answer. She reached for the boy's hand instead and said, "Let's go, Leo." And the sound of that name, short, familiar, already belonging to a whole life he knew nothing about, hit Julian somewhere he hadn't expected to feel anything. "Amara," he stepped forward. "How old is he?" She kept walking. He didn't follow. He stood in the lobby of an elementary school with a renovation proposal under his arm and understood, without anyone saying another word, that the child he had grieved for 4 years had never died. Julian Ashford had grown up understanding that the world could be arranged if you had enough patience and enough capital. His grandfather had built the company from a single office in downtown Atlanta, and by the time Julian was old enough to work summer internships, Ashford Development had projects in 6 states. His father Reginald ran the firm now. His mother Ingrid ran everything else. Julian met Amara at a fundraiser for the city's public school foundation. She was there representing Westbrook Elementary. He was there because his mother had bought a table. Amara was the kind of person who knew exactly why she was somewhere and had no interest in pretending otherwise. She wasn't performing for anyone. When the man next to her started talking about school funding as though it were an abstract policy question, she corrected him twice with specific numbers, and a patience that was barely contained. Julian watched from across the table and decided he wanted to talk to her. It took him 3 separate attempts before she gave him more than a polite response. She told him later that she'd assumed he was like every other person at that table, someone for whom a charitable gala was a social appointment, not a cause. He spent the better part of an hour convincing her he was worth a phone call, and she gave him her number mostly to end the conversation. He called the next morning. They dated for 9 months. Julian learned quickly that Amara was not going to soften because he wanted her to. She taught 1st grade. She drove a car with a dent in the passenger door she had been meaning to fix for 2 years. She called her mother Dolores every Sunday evening without fail. She had opinions about everything and shared them without much concern for whether he agreed. He had never been around anyone quite like her. The trouble started the night his mother came to dinner. Ingrid had known since the 3rd month that Julian was serious about Amara. She had waited. She was good at waiting. She let the relationship run long enough that he believed she had accepted it. Then she sat down across from Amara at a restaurant in Buckhead and spent an hour asking questions that were really just a different shape of the same statement. "You don't belong here. What do your parents do? How long have you been at that school? Do you see yourself staying in education long term?" Amara answered everything directly. She didn't apologize for herself. Julian watched his mother's mouth tighten each time Amara declined to be made smaller. On the drive home, Ingrid said, "She's lovely, Julian, but she's not right for what this family needs." He told her she was wrong. 2 weeks later, Amara ended things. She didn't give him a long explanation. She said she could see the shape of his life clearly enough. What his family expected, what he would eventually choose. And she wasn't going to spend years waiting for the moment he stopped negotiating between her and them. She said she cared about him. She said that wasn't the same thing as believing it would work. He asked her to give it more time. She shook her head. Julian drove home and sat in the parking garage for 40 minutes before he went inside. 6 weeks after the breakup, Amara sat in her car in a CVS parking lot with a paper bag on the passenger seat and told herself she was wrong. She couldn't be. The timing was off, the stress of the semester had thrown everything out of rhythm. She was overthinking it. She was not overthinking it. She sat on her bathroom floor that night for a long time. She was 31 years old. She had just left a relationship she hadn't wanted to leave. She had 3 classes of first graders depending on her 5 days a week. She had a body that was now apparently doing something she had not planned for. She did not think about Julian first. She thought about her classroom, her lesson plans, the spring semester. Then, she thought about the small gray shape on the ultrasound screen 3 days later, and something shifted in her chest. Her doctor was direct with her. There was a uterine abnormality. This pregnancy would need close monitoring. If she lost this one, conceiving again might be very difficult. Amara drove home with both hands on the wheel and made her decision somewhere on I-285 before she reached her exit. She called Julian. She told him she needed to talk. He picked the restaurant where they'd gone on their first date. She noticed the candle on the table. She noticed the way he sat up straighter when she walked in. She put the doctor's paperwork on the table. He went very quiet. She watched his face work through surprise, and then something that wasn't quite readiness. He said things that made sense individually. They had just ended things. He hadn't expected this. He didn't know how to be a father, and each sentence landed the way a door closing sounds in an empty hallway. "I understand," she said. He reached across the table. "I didn't say I was walking away." "You didn't have to." She picked up her bag. "I'm going to raise this baby, with or without you." He called 11 times that night. She didn't answer. He was outside her building the next morning. He said he'd panicked. He said his first reaction wasn't his final answer. He said he wanted to do right by her. She asked him one question: "What does right look like to you?" He said he wanted to marry her. He wanted her to meet his parents properly. He wanted to try. She agreed to the visit, but not because she believed in the outcome. She agreed because she needed to see it for herself. Ingrid met them in the living room of the Ashford estate north of the city. She was composed. She offered tea. She asked Amara about her work with a smile that never reached her eyes, and when Amara said she had no plans to leave teaching, Ingrid set her cup down and said, "In this family, the wives manage the home. That's always served us well." Amara looked at Julian. He looked at the floor. She left before the tea was finished. 3 days later, Ingrid called Amara directly. She was brief. She said that whatever arrangement needed to be made could be made quietly. The child, if there was one, would be provided for. Amara's career would remain intact. Her privacy would be protected. "Are you offering to buy my child?" Amara said. "I'm offering you clarity," Ingrid said, "about what you're walking into." Amara hung up and sat with her hand over her stomach for a very long time. She thought about Julian's face in that living room, the way he'd chosen silence when she needed him to speak. She thought about what Ingrid was capable of. Not anger, but strategy. Ingrid didn't threaten loudly. She arranged things. When Julian came back a week later, with a ring box in his jacket pocket and an apology on his face, Amara looked at him and said the thing she had been rehearsing since that phone call. "I lost the baby." The color left his face. She kept her hands still. She kept her voice level. She told him it had happened 4 days ago. She told him she was okay. She told him she thought it was better if they didn't see each other anymore. He left the ring in his pocket. He stood at her door for what felt like a full minute without moving, and then he said quietly, "I'm so sorry, Amara." She nodded. The door closed. She sat down on her kitchen floor and pressed her forehead against the cabinet and stayed there until she could breathe normally again. Dolores moved into Amara's second bedroom in October. She didn't ask many questions. She bought a rocking chair for the corner, learned which herbal teas Amara could keep down during the first trimester, and made a habit of leaving dinner in the refrigerator before Amara got home from school. "You don't have to be here every night," Amara told her once. "I know," Dolores said, and stayed. Leo was born in March. He came out fighting, which was what the nurses said when they handed him over, because his first sound wasn't a soft cry, but something louder and more insistent. Amara held him and looked at his face and felt something settle in her body that she didn't have words for. She named him Leonard, after no one in particular. She called him Leo from the day he came home. He was 4 when he asked where his father was. Amara had been expecting it. She had prepared for it. She had answered the question 10 different ways in her head over the years, testing each one for how much it would cost him later. She sat down on the floor beside him and said, "Your dad lives somewhere else. He doesn't know about you yet." Leo looked at her for a long moment. "Does he want to?" he asked. She didn't answer right away. He accepted her silence the way children do, not as a door closing, but as a question left open. Julian came back into her life on a Tuesday afternoon in February. She was walking Leo to the car after afternoon pickup when she saw Julian in the school parking lot, talking to the principal with a set of building plans under his arm. Ashford Development had bid on the district's renovation contract. She hadn't known. She should have checked. He turned and saw her before she could redirect. Their eyes met, then his gaze moved to Leo. She watched the recognition move through his face, the way weather moves. Nothing dramatic, just a slow change in the quality of the light. He found her at the car. He was careful about it, no raised voice, no scene, but he stood close enough that she couldn't ignore him. "He's 4, Julian said. It wasn't a question. 5 next month. You told me you lost him." She unlocked the car. "Get in, Leo." "Amara." His voice broke on the second syllable. "Just barely. You told me he was gone." She turned to face him. "I know what I told you." He looked at Leo through the car window. The boy was watching them both with the calm, observant attention of a child who had learned that adult conversations sometimes held information worth understanding. "I want to know him," Julian said. "I know," she said, "but that's not only your decision." What followed was slow and difficult, and nothing like what Amara had imagined during the years she'd spent half dreading this moment. Julian was awkward with Leo at first in the way that men who are used to being competent sometimes are when they encounter something they can't strategize. He brought too many toys. He talked too fast. He asked questions Leo didn't know how to answer, and then filled the silences himself, which made Leo go quiet the way he always did when he felt crowded. But he kept showing up. He learned that Leo didn't like loud restaurants, that he could spend 45 minutes watching birds at a feeder without getting bored, that he carried a small inhaler in his backpack and needed it when he ran too hard or when the air turned cold too fast. Amara wrote all of this down. She gave Julian the list the third time they met. She watched him read it carefully. "Has he had an episode recently?" Julian asked. 2 months ago. It passes quickly if he uses the inhaler on time." "Does he know how?" "He knows to tell an adult immediately. He doesn't administer it himself." Julian folded the paper and put it in his jacket pocket. 6 weeks in, he asked to take Leo out alone for a day. Amara didn't answer for 3 days. Dolores sat with her that Thursday evening and said, "You've been watching him for a month and a half. Has he done anything that worried you?" "No." "Does Leo like spending time with him?" Amara looked at the hallway, where Leo's sneakers were sitting at an angle by the door, the way they always were, no matter how many times she straightened them. "Yes," she said. "Then you have to give him the chance. You can't call it a chance if every door is still locked." She called Julian the next morning. She agreed to a Saturday. She chose the Children's Science Museum, somewhere Leo would be comfortable, with clear exits and familiar types of spaces. She reminded Julian about the inhaler. She reminded him to check the air quality before going outside. She reminded him that Leo went quiet when he was overwhelmed, not loud, and that quiet was actually the signal something was wrong. Julian said, "I'll bring him back by 5:30. 5:30, she confirmed. She stood at her kitchen window for 20 minutes after they drove away. He sent her photos throughout the day. Leo at the planetarium. Leo eating a turkey sandwich, no mustard exactly as she'd written on the list. Leo asleep against the car window at 4:15. She exhaled for the first time all day. At 5 o'clock, her phone rang. It wasn't Julian's number. It was a woman's voice, measured, careful. "Genevieve," she said. She was Julian's colleague. She was at the Ashford estate. "Why is my son at the Ashford estate?" Amara's voice stayed flat. A pause. "Julian brought him to meet his parents about an hour ago. I'm sorry. I didn't know until I arrived." Amara was already reaching for her keys. She called Julian twice. No answer. She drove 23 minutes in a direction she had not driven in more than 4 years and pulled up to a set of iron gates she had promised herself she would never have reason to return to. The security guard did not open it. She called Julian again, 4 rings, 5. He answered on the 6th. "Where is Leo?" She was very calm. She had learned how to be very calm. "He's inside, he's fine. My parents wanted to meet." "You told me 5:30. It's 5:12 and my son is inside that house. Amara, bring him to the gate. There was a long pause. I'll bring him home in the morning, Julian said. The line went quiet. She stood outside those gates for 40 minutes. She heard Leo's voice once, faintly, somewhere on the other side of a hedge, and she pressed her hand flat against the iron bars and breathed. Inside the house, according to what she pieced together later, Reginald was telling Julian that Amara had no legal standing, that Leo carried her name and lived by her rules, and that Julian had spent 5 years mourning a child he hadn't known was alive. That this was his opportunity to correct that. Inside the house, Leo had gone quiet in the way that meant he was overwhelmed. He had asked 3 times to call his mom. He was sitting in a corner of the study with his knees pulled up. And inside the house, the air conditioning was running high, and the night air had come in cold. Through a side door someone had left open, and Leo's breathing had started to change. It was Genevieve who noticed it first. She had worked with Julian long enough to know when something was wrong, and wrong enough to require immediate action. She took one look at Leo's face, at the way his small shoulders were rising with each breath, and she walked to the front of the house and pressed the gate control herself. The gates opened. Amara was already walking before they were fully apart. She didn't look at the house, didn't acknowledge Ingrid standing in the doorway or Reginald 2 steps behind her. She walked through the entryway and followed the sound of Leo's breathing, and found him in the study with his back against the wall and his eyes wide and fixed on the door. Mom. She crossed the room in 4 steps. She was already reaching into his backpack for the inhaler. Look at me, she said. Right here. Take a slow breath. He tried. Again. The inhaler. A count. Another breath. She kept her hand at the back of his neck, steady, and talked him down the way she had talked him down a dozen times before. Her voice even, almost boring, just a low thread of sound for him to follow back to normal. Julian stood in the doorway of the study. She didn't look at him. By the time Leo's breathing had settled, he had stopped shaking. By the time they reached the front door, he was holding her hand and asking if they could get soup from the place on Briarcliff Road. Yes, she said, absolutely. She buckled him into the car. She stood up and closed the door, and then she turned around. Julian was standing on the front steps. She looked at him for a long moment. You told me 5:30, she said. I gave you 5:30. I gave you a list. I gave you his medical history. I explained what quiet means when it happens and why it matters. He didn't say anything. You decided one agreement didn't apply to you. And that's fine. That's who you've always been, Julian. But Leo is not a decision you get to override. I know, he said. I know. Do you? He looked at his son through the car window. Leo was already watching his tablet, the crisis behind him the way things move behind children. Fast and then gone. What he needs, Amara said, is someone he can count on to keep their word. She got in the car. Julian did not see Leo for 2 weeks after that night. He didn't fight it. He sent 2 messages asking how Leo was doing, and one that said only, I was wrong. Amara read them and did not respond to the first 2. The third one she read 3 times. When they met again, at a mediator's office, with a family specialist present, Julian came alone. Reginald and Ingrid sat outside in the hallway because Julian had asked them to, and then made clear it was not optional. Leo sat in a small chair and told the specialist that he liked his dad when his dad was in a good mood, and that he wasn't sure about sleeping at his dad's house because he didn't want to be somewhere his mom couldn't get to him. The specialist thanked him and took him for a snack. Amara watched Julian absorb what his son had just said. He's not afraid of you, she said quietly, but he needs to know the door opens. Julian nodded slowly. Do you understand what I mean? I think I've understood for a while, he said. I just kept choosing not to act on it. He told the mediator that Leo would continue living with his mother, that visits would happen on a schedule fitting Leo's routine, that overnight stays would come later, when Leo decided he was ready, that Reginald and Ingrid would not have unsupervised contact until both parents had agreed to it. Reginald did not take this calmly. Amara heard his voice rise once through the closed door. She watched Julian sit very still until it stopped. Afterward, Amara stood outside the building in the thin winter sun, waiting for Dolores to bring Leo around from the parking lot. Julian came out behind her and stopped several feet away. I want to apologize, he said, for what my mother said to you, before Leo was born. She looked at him. I didn't know she called you. She told me that last week. It doesn't change what happened, Amara said. No. He put his hands in his pockets. But I want you to know that whatever she offered you, I wouldn't have agreed to it, if I'd known. Amara thought about that CVS parking lot, the bathroom floor, the drive home on I-285 when she had made her decision. Maybe, she said, but I didn't know that, and I couldn't risk Leo on a maybe. He nodded. Leo came running around the corner with Dolores close behind him, his sneakers slapping the pavement, and he slowed when he saw Julian, and then kept walking until he was standing between them. Are we still going to the bird sanctuary? He asked. He was looking at Julian. Amara saw something move across Julian's face, brief and complicated and real. Yeah, Julian said. Next Saturday your mom can come if she wants to. Leo looked up at her. We'll see, she said. He seemed to find this acceptable. He went back to Dolores and immediately began telling her something about a film he'd seen at the Science Museum, his voice carrying back to them through the cold air, full and unhurried. Julian watched him go. He's extraordinary, he said very quietly. Amara looked at her son, the red backpack, the too loud sneakers, the way he talked with his whole body when something interested him. Yes, she said, he is. She had spent 5 years carrying the weight of a decision she would never fully stop questioning. She had been afraid and then resolute, and then afraid again, and somewhere in the middle of all of it she had built a life that was hers and Leo's and Dolores's, and it had been enough. It had been more than enough. She didn't know what came next. She wasn't sure anyone ever did. But Leo was laughing at something Dolores had said, and the sound of it carried all the way across the parking lot, and that was the thing she held on to. Not what had been lost, not what had been broken, not what still needed to be repaired. Just that sound. Just her son out in the open and not afraid.